You stupid waiter! The prince's voice, laced with contempt, rang out in Arabic loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Geoffrey Bernard froze, the champagne bottle slipping from his hand. Glass shattered across the marble floor, the casualty of Prince Rami al-Hassan's deliberate trip. His entourage burst into laughter. He doesn't even realize I just humiliated him, the prince continued in Arabic, flicking his gold-ringed fingers with disdain. Americans send the most useless people to serve the royal class. Geoffrey's hand trembled as he knelt to gather the sharp fragments, his reflection staring back at him from every shard. His black uniform was soaked, his face tense, his blue eyes burning with restrained anger. "Look at him! Completely clueless," the prince sneered to his companions. "I could insult his entire family, and he would still smile to earn a tip." Blood seeped from Geoffrey's fingertip, where he gripped a piece of glass too tightly. He lifted his gaze and met the prince's eyes, something dangerous beginning to flicker inside him. No one in the room knew that the man kneeling before them, the one they assumed to be uneducated, was, in fact, a linguistic scholar finishing his doctoral dissertation on Middle Eastern diplomatic communication at Georgetown. No one knew Geoffrey understood every word, every nuance of every insult that had just been spoken. And even fewer knew that his silence was not ignorance. It was strategy. A strategy nearing its final limit. 3 years earlier, his wife had died after a long illness, leaving him with a 5-year-old son and a mountain of hospital debt. Tonight, after putting Lucas to bed, he had come to the St. Regis to serve some of the richest people in the world. And tonight, they had crossed the one line he could not tolerate. Before we continue, if you want to hear stories of resilience, the irony of prejudice, and the kind of reversals no one ever sees coming, hit subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. But the question is, will Geoffrey stay silent? Or is he about to respond in a way no one in that room could ever imagine? The Astor Court sits on the 5th floor of the St. Regis, New York, a kingdom of refined luxury where the international elite dine beneath hand-blown crystal chandeliers. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook Fifth Avenue, the city lights sparkling like fallen stars scattered across Manhattan. Staff move with rehearsed precision across the Carrara marble floors, their black uniforms intentionally contrasting with the room's cream and gold palette. Every detail signals exclusivity. Baccarat crystal glasses, plates rimmed in 24-karat gold, velvet Versace chairs. A single dinner here could pay 3 months' rent in Queens. Mr. Nabil Haddad, the Lebanese restaurant manager with silver mustache and an Armani suit, patrols the dining room with the vigilance of a general. He ensures every table maintains the quiet, privileged atmosphere expected. Standards are never to be lowered, he reminds the staff during the 4 p.m. pre-shift meeting. Our guests pay $500 for a bottle of wine. They pay for perfection. Tonight, on an October Friday, the restaurant buzzes with whispered business negotiations. Tech CEOs discuss IPOs. United Nations diplomats debate resolutions. Park Avenue elites arrange marriages for their children. Money is never mentioned outright, but it underpins every interaction. Regulars know the unspoken rules. No photos, discreet conversation, and absolute, no, invisible, deference from the staff. The Astor Court's reputation rests on its ability to make the powerful feel like gods on Mount Olympus. In one corner, Wall Street hedge funds trade insider whispers over 1982 Burgundy. In another, a Broadway star murmurs to a Hollywood director. Near the Steinway piano, a European royal family strategizes a royal wedding. But tonight, every now and then, glances drift toward the central table. A round, leather-lined booth with a view of Central Park, where Prince Rami al-Hassan and his entourage have been seated. Their laughter is just a little too loud for the Astor Court's cultivated elegance, sending ripples of quiet disapproval across the room. They've downed Dom Perignon champagne as if it were water. He ordered Japanese A5 Wagyu, $400 for 4 ounces, then sent it back for being slightly dry. And now they had just caused a waiter to fall, purely for entertainment. At 6 o'clock that morning, Jeffrey Bernard woke up in the small one-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens. Autumn sunlight slipped through the torn curtain, falling across the wedding photo on the nightstand. Him and Laura, 9 years ago, beaming as if the future belonged to them. Sometimes he still forgot she was gone. Sometimes he still reached across the bed at night, searching for her warmth. Sometimes he still heard her voice. "Jeff, I'm starving. Make me pancakes." But this morning, like every morning for the past 3 years, he got up alone. "Daddy!" Lucas ran out from the little bedroom, blonde hair messy, wearing Spider-Man pajamas. "It's Friday! Pizza day at school!" Jeffrey scooped his son into his arms, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo. "Pizza day, huh? Then I guess I need to give you extra money for chocolate milk." "Yes!" Lucas punched the air triumphantly. While Jeffrey prepared breakfast, sunny-side eggs, toast, and freshly squeezed orange juice, Lucas sat at the tiny kitchen table, legs swinging, working on math homework. The apartment was too small, too old, with uneven heating, but it was their home. "Daddy?" Lucas asked without looking up from his notebook. "Do you have to work late tonight?" "Yes, kiddo. I'll be home around midnight, but Ms. Hainan will come watch you." Lucas scrunched his nose. "She always makes me go to bed at 8:30. "Because 8:30 is your bedtime," Jeffrey laughed, ruffling his hair. "You know that. Daddy needs to work, so you can pay the bills and finish school," Lucas finished, reciting the words by heart. "I know, Daddy." Jeffrey knelt down until they were eye to eye. "Are you mad at me?" Lucas was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I just miss you, even when you're home." An invisible knife twisted inside Jeffrey's chest. "I know, buddy. I'm sorry." "Ms. Hainan says Mommy's in heaven, and she's proud of you," Lucas said, his voice serious like a grown-up. "She says you're doing something important." Jeffrey swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "I hope so too, kiddo." 7:30 a.m. at PS 122 Elementary School. Jeffrey stood among the other parents at the school gate, mostly mothers, a few fathers. They chatted about weekend playdates, upcoming vacations. Jeffrey stood slightly apart, as usual. "Daddy," Lucas squeezed his hand tightly before running inside. "You're the best dad in the world." "And you're the best son in the world," Jeffrey replied, brushing a hand over his hair. "Have a great day, okay?" Watching Lucas run into school, his Spider-Man backpack bouncing with each step, Jeffrey felt both joy and despair at once. 3 years of raising a child alone. 3 years of working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. 3 years of trying to be both father and mother. And still feeling like it wasn't enough. Back home, Jeffrey opened his laptop. The screen lit up with his doctoral dissertation. Language as Power. A study of dialect and status, dynamics in modern Middle Eastern diplomatic communication. Chapter 7 was still unfinished. The deadline was in February, 4 months away. His advisor at Georgetown emailed weekly reminders. "Jeffrey, you need to focus. This research is excellent, but it won't write itself." He managed 5 pages before his vision blurred from exhaustion. Last night's shift had gone until 2 a.m. He slept at 3, woke at 6, and tonight, another shift awaited. Jeffrey laid his head on the table, intending to rest for 5 minutes. He woke up at 2:45 p.m. with a surge of panic. Oh my God! He had to pick up Lucas at 3. Jeffrey arrived breathless, just in time for Lucas to run out. "You're late," Lucas observed. "Sorry, kid. Daddy overslept." On the way home, Lucas chattered about his school day. "Mr. Rodriguez said I'm the best at math. And I played with Emma at recess. And today's pizza had extra pepperoni." Jeffrey listened, smiled, asked questions, trying to be fully present for his son, trying to forget that in 2 hours he'd have to leave again and let Ms. Hanan take over. Ms. Hanan Saleh arrived at 5 p.m. "Habibi," she embraced Jeffrey as if he were her own child. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine, Ms. Hanan." She, 68 years old, silver-haired, warm brown eyes, had been Jeffrey's family's neighbor in Boston when he was little. When Laura died, and Jeffrey moved to New York to be closer to Georgetown and to find better-paying work, Ms. Hanan volunteered to move as well to help care for Lucas. "You're not taking money?" Jeffrey asked her once. "You're my son," she replied, "and Lucas is my grandson. Family doesn't charge money." Every night, she arrived at 5, cooked dinner for Lucas, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, and every night, Jeffrey felt gratitude so deep it nearly brought him to tears. "How was today?" she asked in Arabic, standing in the hallway. "Tiring," Jeffrey answered in Arabic. "But, okay. You're doing what you're meant to do," she said, stroking his cheek. "Laura is watching and proud of you." At 5:30 p.m., Jeffrey sat on the crowded subway to Manhattan, his server uniform in his backpack, headphones over his ears, repeating Arabic phrases from a language-learning podcast. "Hal yumkinuni Musa adatuk?" "May I help you?" "Shukran jazilan." "Thank you very much." "Ana asif." "I'm sorry." Phrases he never said at work, because everyone assumed he didn't know Arabic. Because it was his secret weapon, his ability to understand without being detected. In 3 years working at the Astor Court, Jeffrey had heard everything. Illegal business deals discussed in Arabic, assuming the American staff wouldn't understand. Affairs arranged, political schemes, and sometimes simple, naked contempt for the servants. He wrote everything down in his research notebook, not to expose anyone, but to understand how language reveals power, privilege, and human nature when people believe no one is listening. Sometimes you learn more by listening than by speaking. Ms. Hanan had taught him when he was 15 and first learning Arabic. When people think you don't understand, they reveal who they really are. Tonight, Jeffrey had no idea that lesson was about to be tested in a way he had never imagined. 6:01 p.m. in the staff locker room at the St. Regis. Jeffrey changed into his uniform. Black slacks, white shirt, black vest, black tie, polished leather shoes. He looked at himself in the mirror. 34, but looking closer to 40. Dark circles under his eyes, brown blonde hair starting to show strands of gray. "You good, Jeff?" asked Elias Romero, his Mexican co-worker. "Yeah, just tired. Friday night shifts are always crazy. VIPs everywhere." Elias frowned. "And tonight, I heard we've got Arab royalty. Haddad is stressed as hell." "Fantastic," Jeffrey sighed. Elias patted his shoulder. "Hang in there, hermano. Tips will be good." But Jeffrey wasn't doing this for tips. He was doing it because he had no other choice. The pre-shift meeting began at 6:30 p.m. Mr. Nabil Haddad stood before 12 servers, his expression severe. "Tonight, we have highly important guests," he said, his voice carrying a slight Lebanese accent. "Prince Rami Al Hassan of Saudi Arabia and his entourage. His family owns a hotel chain that competes with ours. This is an opportunity to impress, or a disaster that could cost us a $200 million Middle East contract." A ripple of murmurs spread across the group. "Jeffrey Bernard," he called, "you will serve the prince's table." Jeffrey's heart dropped. "Sir, I think someone more experienced should—" "The more experienced ones," Haddad cut in, "have all suddenly found reasons they cannot make it tonight." Jeffrey glanced around. Suddenly, every veteran server became extremely interested in their shoes. "Jeffrey, Mr. Haddad lowered his voice. "I know you're struggling. I know about your wife, about your son. But tonight, you must be perfect. My career depends on this. So does your job. In short, do not make a mistake." 8:15 p.m. Prince Rami al-Hassan arrived. The revolving doors of the St. Regis opened, and the world seemed to slow. 5 men, each wearing Brioni suits, Patek Philippe watches, and Tom Ford cologne, entered with the confidence of people who have never had to ask permission for anything. Prince Rami was in the center. 37 years old, 6'2", perfectly trimmed beard, slicked back black hair, dark brown eyes scanning the room as if appraising everything, and finding all of it lacking. Beside him, Sheikh Omar al-Mansur, 72, an oil tycoon with a weathered face and sharp eyes. Samir Qadri, the prince's advisor, wearing glasses and carrying a tablet. The twins, Faris and Nabil Nassar, tech investors in their late 40s, always appearing to be calculating something. Mr. Haddad nearly rushed to them. "Your Highness, welcome to the Astor Court. It is an honor." "Where is our table?" The prince cut him off, his Oxford-accented English instantly recognizable to Geoffrey. "Right this way, sir. Please follow me." They were led to the VIP booth, a round leather-lined table overlooking Central Park, where the autumn lights shimmered between the trees. The best table in the restaurant. Geoffrey stood at the service station, heart racing, mouth dry. He had served celebrities, CEOs, politicians. But this group was different. The way they walked, the way they didn't even glance at the staff, as if Geoffrey were a piece of furniture, sent a small chill down his spine. Layla Petrova, his Russian co-worker, whispered, "Good luck, Jeff. I heard this prince is a nightmare. My cousin served him in London. Got fired because he complained the coffee was too hot." "Wonderful," Geoffrey muttered. "But the tips are insane," Layla added hopefully. "These people tip $5,000 like it's $5. Geoffrey didn't care about tips. He just wanted to survive the shift, get home to Lucas, and not get fired. "Geoffrey!" Mr. Haddad motioned sharply, his voice tight as a drawn wire. "Champagne! Now!" Geoffrey approached the table with a tray of champagne, Krug Clos d'Ambonnet 2000, at $3,500 a bottle. His hands were steady, but his heart beat like a drum. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said in careful, respectful English. "Welcome to the Astor Court. May I pour champagne for you?" Prince Rami barely glanced up from his phone. He waved assent, while continuing a conversation with Samir in Arabic about a real estate deal in Dubai. Geoffrey poured each glass with trained precision. The perfect angle, the right amount of foam, not a drop spilled. Sheikh Omar studied his name tag. "Geoffrey," he pronounced in English. "An American name. How long have you worked here?" "Yes, sir. 3 years," Geoffrey replied politely. Before Sheikh Omar could ask another question, Prince Rami interrupted in Arabic. Gulf dialect. Saudi accent. "Why bother asking? These people are replaceable like tissue. One American waiter is the same as any other." Geoffrey's hand, midway through pouring the last glass, trembled slightly, but he controlled it. His expression remained neutral. His smile stayed professional. Inside, something tightened. It wasn't the first time he'd been insulted. 3 years as a server had exposed him to everything. Rude guests, drunk guests, discriminatory guests. But usually, they had the decency to whisper. This prince? He spoke loudly, comfortably, as if the staff weren't human. "What would you like to start with, gentlemen?" Geoffrey asked, his voice so steady it surprised even him. "Beluga caviar," Samir said in English, not bothering to look at the menu. "And Wagyu, rare. The prince doesn't eat overcooked meat." "Excellent, sir. Caviar and Wagyu. I'll inform the chef right away." As Geoffrey turned to leave, he heard Prince Rami mutter in Arabic, "At least they trained him to push the expensive dishes. Perhaps not entirely useless." Soft chuckles followed. Geoffrey walked toward the kitchen, back straight, shoulders square. But inside, his heartbeat quickened. Don't react. Don't react. You need this job. Lucas needs you. In the kitchen, Chef Julien Moreau, A silver-haired Frenchman with 3 Michelin stars was conducting his team like a maestro. "Geoffrey," he called, "what does the prince want?" "Beluga caviar, Wagyu rare." "Naturellement," Chef nodded. "The rich always want the expensive things." "Were they rude?" Geoffrey hesitated. "They are VIPs." Chef Moreau placed a hand on his shoulder. "Geoffrey, I've been in this business 30 years. I know when a guest is married. If they cross the line, you tell me." "Thank you, Chef." But they both knew Geoffrey wouldn't say a word, because saying something would mean trouble, possibly losing his job. And Geoffrey could not lose this job. Geoffrey returned to the table with a silver tray in his hands. On it sat a crystal bowl of beluga caviar at $850 an ounce, surrounded by blinis, crème fraîche, chopped boiled egg, and finely diced onions. He arranged each element with the precision of an artist. Mother-of-pearl spoon, never meddle with caviar. Chilled towels, lemon wedges. His hands moved with a practiced elegance. As Geoffrey bent over his work, Prince Rami shifted his tone, switching to a rougher Saudi dialect, not the polished Arabic from before, but a streetier register, sharp and biting. "Americans don't understand real luxury. Look at how he's handling the caviar, like he's feeding pigs." Faris Nassar laughed. "They think ketchup is cuisine." "The last time I was in New York," the prince went on, tasting the caviar, "I saw homeless people on every corner. They can't take care of their own citizens, but they lecture us on human rights." Nabil Nassar added, eyes flicking toward Geoffrey, "This one probably lives in some slum in Queens, serving us just to make rent." "If he's lucky," Samir scoffed. Geoffrey continued arranging everything, his face a masterpiece of neutrality. But beneath that calm, a small voice rang out in his mind. "You know what, Jeff? They're right. You do live in a dump in Queens. You are serving them to make rent. And maybe, just maybe, you don't belong here." But then another voice, Laura's voice from those final days, cut through. "Jeff, you're doing honest work to feed your child. That's nothing to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." "Would you like anything else, gentlemen?" Geoffrey asked in English, his tone even, polite, betraying no crack in his composure. "Wine," the prince ordered. "Where is your sommelier?" As Geoffrey stepped away from the table, he heard the prince mimic him. Listen to how he says sommelier like a peasant. Sommelier. The whole table burst out laughing. Sommelier Pierre, the Frenchman, appeared, wine list in hand. But the prince tugged the menu from him, flipped through a few pages, then said, "Chateau Margaux, 1995. 2 bottles." "An excellent choice, monsieur," Pierre nodded. "Each bottle is $2,800. "I did not ask the price," the prince replied coolly. Pierre dipped his head and stepped back. Geoffrey was summoned to assist with opening and pouring. As he gently twisted the corkscrew and carefully drew out the cork, the conversation in Arabic flowed around him. "I don't understand why Americans are so arrogant," the prince said. "Look at this city. Trash everywhere. A subway that stinks. Crime on every corner. And yet they still think they're the center of the world." Sheikh Omar, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke, softly. "New York has its problems. But it also has a very particular kind of energy. The energy of decay," the prince waved dismissively. "In 20 years, this city will be a museum. Dubai will be the future." Geoffrey poured the wine, his expression neutral. But inside, he was boiling. Dubai? A city built on near-slave labor from South Asia, where women are second-class citizens, where free speech doesn't exist? That's his idea of the future? But he said nothing. He couldn't. The main course was served at 10 p.m. The Japanese A5 Wagyu arrived, 8 ounces, $400, cooked to a perfect rare, with a beautifully seared golden-brown crust and warm pink center. Geoffrey set the plate down in front of the prince, with the care of someone handling a bomb. The prince cut a piece, placed it in his mouth, chewed. Silence. Then, "Send this back to the kitchen." Jeffrey paused. "I'm sorry, sir?" "I said send it back. It's overcooked." Jeffrey looked down at the steak. Perfectly rare, exactly as ordered, if anything slightly under. "Sir, my apologies, but the chef has prepared it rare, just as you request." "Are you arguing with me?" The prince cut in, his voice ice-cold. "No, sir. I'm only—" "Send it back to the kitchen." Jeffrey picked up the plate, bowing his head. "Right away, sir." As he turned away, he heard in Arabic, "These people can't even get a simple piece of meat right. And they argue. No respect for hierarchy." In Dubai, he'd be fired on the spot, Samir agreed. "Overcooked?" Chef Moreau practically shouted when Jeffrey brought the plate back. "That is a perfect rare. I've been cooking Wagyu for 20 years. "I know, chef. I'm sorry. He just—" "C'est des conneries," the chef snapped, glaring at the steak as if it had personally insulted him. "This is about power. He wants to see us dance." "So what do we do?" The chef looked at Jeffrey, then sighed. "We cook another. This time, blue rare. If he complains again, at least I'll know he's just a donkey." The new Wagyu took 12 minutes. Jeffrey waited, heart pounding, aware that Mr. Haddad was watching, assessing, scoring his performance. Jeffrey set the new plate down. The prince cut a piece, chewed. The silence stretched into discomfort. Then, acceptable. Not excellent. Just acceptable. Jeffrey retreated, feeling Chef Moreau's rage radiating through the kitchen porthole. As Jeffrey prepared the table for dessert, the conversation at the booth continued in Arabic, but this time it got personal. "This waiter," the prince said, "you can tell just by looking at him he'll never amount to anything. Some poor white American with a kid at home, a fat wife, drowning in debt." Nabil Nassar laughed. "Or already divorced. Americans can't sustain a marriage." "Exactly," Samir nodded. "Their culture of individualism destroys the family." Standing just 3 steps away, Jeffrey felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Laura. They were talking about Laura. They were talking about his life like it was a joke. His hands shook as he set down the dessert menus. 4 bottles of wine in. Voices louder. Laughter spilling out of the leather booth. And the prince, feeling completely safe inside his cushion of power, decided to go 1 step further. "Hey!" he called to Jeffrey in English. "Bring more champagne." "Right away, sir." Jeffrey returned to the station, grabbed another bottle of Krug, the 3rd of the night. When he came back to the table, tray balanced in his hands, footsteps carefully measured, Prince Rami suddenly stretched out his leg. A very small movement. Very subtle. Something that could easily be dismissed as an accident, if you didn't know the man. But this was no accident. The prince's $2,000 shoes hooked perfectly around Jeffrey's ankle. Jeffrey stumbled. The tray tilted. The champagne bottle slipped, crashed to the marble floor with a gunshot crack. Time stopped. Champagne splashed onto the prince's pants. Glass scattered everywhere. The entire restaurant turned to look. And Prince Rami, with Oscar-worthy theatrics, shouted in English, "Incompetent! You've ruined my suit!" Jeffrey, kneeling among the shattered glass, looked up. "Sir, I am terribly sorry." "Sorry? This suit costs more than your annual salary." The prince stood, though his pants were barely damp. "Is this what passes for service in New York?" Mr. Haddad appeared, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your Highness, we are deeply sorry." "I want this man fired," the prince declared. "Immediately." Jeffrey's world spun. Fired. Lucas. Rent. Hospital bills. The dissertation. Everything. "Sir," Jeffrey said, still kneeling, his hands bleeding from the glass, "I apologize profoundly. Please give me a chance to make this right." "Be quiet," the prince ordered. Then he turned to his associates, switching to Arabic, Najdi dialect, confident no one understood. "This is what happens when you hire based on diversity quotas instead of competence. Educated, truly intelligent people don't make such idiotic mistakes. But Americans love their failed social experiments, hiring unqualified people and then acting surprised when everything collapses." His companions nodded. "This one," the prince went on, voice dripping with contempt, "probably struggles to follow basic instructions in his own language, let alone understand what real service means. His intellectual ceiling is carved into his very nature." Sheikh Omar, visibly uncomfortable, interjected softly, "Perhaps it was an accident?" "No," the prince cut him off. "This is incompetence. And now we see why he's doing this job instead of anything meaningful." The words hung in the air. Jeffrey, still kneeling in the broken glass, looked up at the man who had just tried to destroy him, and something deep, something that had stayed contained through 3 years of suffering, 3 years of being treated like he was invisible, 3 years of swallowing his dignity for rent money, finally snapped. Not in a way that hurt, in a way that felt like release. Jeffrey knelt amid the shards of broken glass, blood dripping from his fingers onto the white marble floor. Light from the chandeliers reflected off each fragment, scattering into diamond-like streaks. In that moment, time seemed to slow. He saw himself in the largest shard, a 34-year-old man, kneeling, soaked, humiliated in front of a room full of the wealthy. Then he saw something else. He saw Laura in her hospital bed, holding his hand. "Jeff, promise me. Never let anyone make you feel small. You are doing something that matters." He saw Lucas that morning, hugging him tightly. "Daddy, you're the best dad in the world." He saw Ms. Hanan teaching him Arabic for the first time when he was 15. "Language is power, my son. But true power isn't in speaking. It's in knowing when to speak." And then he saw himself, not the man kneeling before them, but the scholar, the father, the man who had survived the unimaginable and still stood up every single day. Enough. Jeffrey gathered the largest shards of glass and placed them carefully on the tray. His movements were slow, deliberate, no longer the hurried motions of a frightened server, but the calm actions of someone who had made a decision. He rose slowly, with dignity, wiped his hands on a linen napkin, leaving a faint smear of blood. Then he looked directly into Prince Rami's eyes, not down, not away, straight at him. Mr. Haddad was saying something, apologies, promises, pleading. But Jeffrey didn't hear any of it. He only heard the beating of his own heart. "Would you like me to bring you a towel, sir?" he asked in English, his voice so steady it was almost eerie. "I want you out of here," the prince said coldly. Jeffrey nodded slowly. "I understand." And then, in the moment he would later remember as the turning point of his life, he spoke, in flawless classical Arabic, his pronunciation clear as a poet's. "But before I leave, sir, I simply wish to note that tonight's special baklava uses a rose water syrup technique from your grandmother's region of Najd, a subtle nod to traditional preparation methods rarely found outside Saudi Arabia." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Not ordinary silence, the kind where the entire world stops spinning. Samir Kadri froze mid-sip. The Nasser twins stopped chewing. Sheikh Omar set his knife down slowly, and Prince Rami's face cycled through 5 expressions in 5 seconds. Shock, denial, realization, then a cold, hard anger. From nearby tables, guests turned. In the kitchen, Chef Moreau and his team peered through the glass window. Mr. Haddad stood frozen like a statue, mouth slightly open. "You speak Arabic," the prince said, voice dangerous. Jeffrey switched fully into classical Arabic. Not street dialect, not casual speech, but the academic, literary register of scholars and poets. Yes, sir. I am currently completing my doctoral dissertation at Georgetown University on dialectal variation across the Arabian Peninsula and its impact on diplomatic communication. My research focuses on the historical evolution of status markers in language, from pre-Islamic poetry to contemporary business negotiations. If the room had been quiet before, now it was a vacuum. No one moved. No one breathed. The specific focus of my scholarship, Jeffrey continued, still respectful but stripped of all deference, is how language reveals power dynamics when speakers believe they are linguistically insulated from their audience. In the past 3 hours, I have taken detailed notes on the dialectal shifts in your conversation, how formal Arabic gradually slipped into regional variants as comfort increased, particularly during topics assumed to be private. Prince Rami's jaw clenched so hard the muscles bulged. He switched to the Najdi dialect, the royal family's native tongue, thinking he could expose Jeffrey as a fraud. "So, I suppose you understand this too?" Jeffrey responded in the same dialect, each consonant perfect. "Yes, sir. My research requires fluency in the 7 major Arabic dialect groups. I am particularly fascinated by Najdi, how it preserves the original triconsonantal root structures, maintaining linguistic continuity with the ancient poetic tradition. Ms. Hanan Saleh, my Jordanian neighbor in Boston, introduced me to Arabic when I was 15. By 16, I had mastered modern Standard Arabic. At Georgetown, I studied 6 additional dialects: Najdi, Gulf, Levantine, Egyptian, Maghrebi, and Iraqi." Samir swallowed hard, the sound sharp in the silence, like someone watching a car crash unfold in slow motion. Nabil Nassar whispered to his brother in English. He understood everything. "Every word," Jeffrey confirmed in English, then switched back to Arabic, including the parts about diversity quotas, intellectual ceilings, and how I probably struggle to follow basic instructions in my own language. Prince Rami shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor in a jarring screech. "What is this?" he demanded in English, scrambling to reassert dominance. "Some sort of social experiment? Are you recording us?" "No, sir," Jeffrey replied in English, his voice calm. "I'm working. A job I need in order to raise my 8-year-old son after my wife died of cancer 3 years ago, leaving me with $180,000 in medical debt. I work nights here to pay that debt while completing my doctorate and raising my son alone." His voice did not shake. Not with fear, not with anger, just truth. "This job," he continued, "requires me to serve some of the wealthiest people in the world with respect and dignity, no matter how they treat me. And for 3 years, I have done exactly that. I have smiled while being insulted. I have apologized for mistakes I didn't make. I have stayed silent while being demeaned." He stepped forward, not threateningly, just enough for everyone to hear him clearly. "But tonight, sir, you crossed a line. Not because you insulted me, I'm used to that, but because you did it with complete certainty that my invisibility meant ignorance. You believed that because I served you, I could not understand you, that my uniform erased my humanity." The room was absolute stillness. No clattering dishes, no whispered conversations. Even the kitchen staff had stopped moving. Sheikh Omar, for the first time all evening, smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but respect. Prince Rami, realizing the room was waiting for his response, tried to strike back. "The most basic Arabic," he said in English dismissively. "Any tourist can learn a few phrases." Jeffrey nodded politely, then shifted into Saudi street dialect, the language of marketplaces, taxi drivers, the everyday people. A register the prince would never expect a foreigner to know. "Perhaps you would feel more comfortable with Amiya, colloquial Arabic." The rise of urban slang in Riyadh since the 1970s is particularly fascinating, reflecting the socio-economic transition from a traditional Bedouin society to an oil-driven urban landscape. His tone remained academic, not showing off, but teaching. Or, if you prefer, he switched to Gulf Arabic. We could discuss the grammatical differences between Khaliji and Najdi, especially the use of ya al-mutakalim in present-tense verb structures. Samir covered his face. The Nasser brothers exchanged panicked glances. The entire table realized, with perfect clarity, that every word they had spoken tonight, every cruel joke, every supposedly discreet remark, had not disappeared into the air. They lived inside the memory of the waiter standing before them. "Enough!" the prince snarled, blade cold. But Sheikh Omar al-Mansur, who had been silent for far too long, placed his hand on the table. "No, let him speak." Prince Rami turned to Sheikh Omar, eyes blazing. "Omar, this is fascinating," Sheikh Omar interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had built an empire from nothing. "Continue, Dr. Bernard." "I don't have my doctorate yet, sir," Geoffrey corrected gently. "But you will," the sheikh replied, "and with this level of mastery, you already deserve the title." The prince's fists clenched. "So, this is all a performance, then? A man pretending to be a scholar, hiding as a waiter so he can— what? Write some exposé about us?" "No, sir," Geoffrey answered honestly. "I need this job. My son needs me to have this job. I don't have the time or energy for performances. I'm trying to survive." "By deceiving us," the prince accused. "By staying silent," Geoffrey corrected. "There's a difference. I never lied about who I am. I simply didn't disclose what I understood, just as you don't disclose your true opinions when you speak English." The remark hit home. The prince flinched just slightly. Sheikh Omar let out a quiet laugh. "He does have a point." "Fine," the prince turned back to Geoffrey, grasping for the upper hand. "If you're truly the scholar you claim to be, prove it. Basic Arabic isn't enough." "What kind of proof would you like, sir?" Geoffrey asked politely. The prince thought for a moment, then a cold smile touched his lips. He switched into formal, classical Arabic, the kind reserved for university professors. "If you are a true scholar, recite for me the opening lines of Wa Laylun Ka Maujil Bahri by al-Mutanabi." The challenge was not just difficult, it was almost impossible. Al-Mutanabi, the great 10th century poet, wrote famously dense verses, layered with metaphor and archaic vocabulary. The night, the horse, and the desert know me is one of the most complex poems in the Arabic canon. Samir smirked, certain Geoffrey would fail. But Geoffrey had read that poem hundreds of times. On sleepless nights beside Laura's hospital bed, on early mornings while Lucas still slept, on subway rides to this very job, a poem about endurance, about turning suffering into strength, had become his prayer. Geoffrey closed his eyes for a moment, not because he needed help recalling the words, but to anchor himself in their emotion. When he opened his eyes and began, his voice was not only technically precise, it was beautiful. Wa laylun ka mawjil bahri arkha sudulahu alayya bi anwari al-humumi li yabtalal. And a night like the waves of the sea, letting down its curtains upon me with every kind of sorrow, to put me to the test. His voice carried through the next 4 lines, each word articulated with accuracy, but also with feeling, as if he were living inside the poem, not merely reciting it. فَقُلْتُ لَهُ لَمَّا تَمَتَّ بِصُلْبِهِ وَأَرْدَفَ أَجَازًا وَنَوَى بِكَلْكَلٍ عَلَى فَانْكَشِفْ أَنْ وَاجِهَ غَيْرِ مُقْرِئٍ بِسُهْدِي فَمَا يَعْتَدُونِ الْهُمُّ وَالْهَلْهَلْ. So I said to it when it stretched out its spine and added its back and leaned with its weight, "Away with you, reveal a face that does not flinch. Through wakefulness, sorrow and fear do not overpower me." When Geoffrey finished, something in the atmosphere shifted. It was no longer the silence of shock, but of reverence. Even those who didn't understand Arabic could feel the beauty in his voice. And then Jeffrey did something no one expected. He continued in English, translating and explaining. Al-Mutanabi wrote this during a period of exile, when he felt abandoned by his patron. He uses the image of the night, Layl, as a metaphor for hardship. But the point isn't the night itself. It's his response to it. Ma yataduni, alhamu wa alhalhalar. Sorrow does not make me yield. Jeffrey looked directly at Prince Rami. 3 years ago, my wife died. I sat at her bedside, holding her hand as she took her last breath. Lucas, our 5-year-old son, was asleep on the chair beside us, not knowing that when he woke up, his mother would be gone. In the months that followed, I read Al-Mutanabi every night, not as an academic exercise, but as a way to stay alive. A small ripple of emotion crossed the faces of some guests at nearby tables. In those months, Jeffrey went on, I read him every single night. Not because it was a text for study, but because it was the only thing that made the darkness bearable. Those verses reminded me that the night is inevitable, but whether it crushes you or not is your choice. Sheikh Omar nodded slowly, eyes bright. Remarkable. Samir stared down at the table. The Nasser brothers exchanged a look, no longer mocking, but thoughtful. But the prince wasn't done. He couldn't allow himself to lose in this public confrontation. Anyone can memorize and repeat, he said, clinging to his last scrap of superiority. True understanding requires more. Tell me, Mr. Bernard, what does Al-Mutanabi mean when he writes, As-sabru mithlu ismihi murrun maquhu, wa aqibatuhu jamilatun hulwun mataquhu? It was the final trap, one of Al-Mutanabi's most difficult lines on patience. But for Jeffrey, this line wasn't obscure. It was his mantra. Patience is like its name. Bitter is its taste, but its outcome is beautiful. Sweet is its savor. Jeffrey translated. Al-Mutanabi builds a clever play on words. Saber, patience, echoes myrrh, bitterness. He's saying that patience is inherently painful, but its result is sweet. His voice softened. When Laura got sick, the doctors said we might have 6 months. We chose to fight. Every day was bitter. Chemotherapy, vomiting, pain, hope rising and then collapsing. But we got 2 more years. 2 more years for Lucas to have his mother. 2 more years of memories. That was the Akiba Jamela, the beautiful outcome of our saber. His voice cracked slightly at the end for the first time that night. And these last 3 years, working this job, raising Lucas alone, finishing my research, that's patience too. Bitter every night. But one day, my son will see that his father didn't give up. That will be the sweetness. No one spoke, not even the prince, because it's hard to argue with someone who doesn't just quote poetry, but has lived exactly what that poetry is about. Sheikh Omar Al-Mansour stood up. At 72 years old, with a reputation for being the most impossible man to please in Middle Eastern business, when he rose, people paid attention. Mr. Bernard, he began in English, then deliberately switched into formal Arabic to correct himself. Dr. Bernard, with the mastery you just demonstrated, you deserve the title. I would like to say a few words. The prince immediately started to object. Sheikh Omar? Be silent, Rami, the sheikh said softly but firmly. It was not a request. It was a command. The prince, face flushed red, sat down. Sheikh Omar turned to Jeffrey. In 50 years of doing business, I have learned that a person's true worth is not measured by their position, but by their qualities. Tonight, you demonstrated rare qualities: intellect without arrogance, strength without brutality, and dignity even when being diminished. He took a leather wallet from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. I built my company on one principle: talent can be found anywhere. My job is to recognize it. He pulled out a business card, Not the ordinary kind, but the gold-engraved one reserved for potential partners. Al-Mansour International Holdings is expanding into the U.S. market. We need a cultural and linguistic advisor, someone who understands not just language, but context, power dynamics, and cultural nuance. He placed the card on the table in front of Jeffrey. "This is not charity," the sheikh said plainly. "This is business. You have skills I need, and I always pay fairly for skills." Jeffrey looked at the card, then up at the sheikh, as if he still didn't dare believe it. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," the sheikh smiled, "and send me your dissertation. My education foundation funds excellent research. You should not have to work 2 jobs just to finish your thesis." From his seat, Prince Rami watched with a conflicted expression, a strange mixture of humiliation, anger, and somewhere deep inside, the faintest flicker of reluctant respect. Faris Nassar, who had mostly been quietly observing all evening, suddenly spoke up. "Sheikh Omar is right. My brother and I are expanding our tech companies into the U.S. The biggest problem we face is cross-cultural communication. Dr. Bernard, I would also like your contact information." Nabil nodded eagerly. "Please, give us your number or email." Even Samir, who had mocked Jeffrey all night, finally spoke, his voice much more cautious. "The Prince's Charity Foundation sometimes needs document translation. Perhaps not," the prince cut in sharply, his voice icy. But it was too late. The tide had turned. In the space of 3 hours, Jeffrey had gone from invisible to in demand. Mr. Nabil Haddad, who had been standing on the periphery with wide, disbelieving eyes, finally stepped forward. "Dr. Bernard," he said, with a level of respect Jeffrey had never heard from him. "I must apologize. I didn't know about—" "It's all right, Mr. Haddad," Jeffrey said gently. "You weren't obligated to know. That is exactly the problem." "I would like—" Mr. Haddad hesitated. "The St. Regis has internal development programs, perhaps a better position, more flexible hours for your research, and," he glanced around the room, "perhaps a cultural awareness seminar for staff?" Jeffrey offered a tired smile. "Let me think about it." From across the dining room, other guests who had silently witnessed everything began approaching. A tech CEO, a Columbia professor, a documentary filmmaker who wanted to make a film about his research, and Jeffrey, who had begun the night carrying trays and praying to remain invisible, was now standing at the center of the room. But the only person he wanted to talk to was Lucas. Jeffrey stood on Fifth Avenue, the October cold slicing through his thin uniform. In his pocket, Sheikh Omar's business card. On his phone, messages from the Nasser brothers. In his email, offers from 3 different companies. But all he wanted was to go home. He called Mrs. Hanan. "Jeffrey, my dear," she answered. "Are you all right? You're later than usual." "Mrs. Hanan," his voice cracked. Something happened." "Are you hurt?" Immediate worry. No, I'm not even sure how to explain it." "Lucas is asleep," she said softly. "Just come home, dear. Tell me everything." On the subway ride back to Queens, Jeffrey sat in the nearly empty car, his head resting against the cold window. He stared at his reflection, still in uniform, still exhausted, but something had changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. He had spoken. After 3 years of swallowing humiliation, erasing himself, becoming invisible, he had finally spoken. And the world had not ended. Quite the opposite. His phone buzzed, a message from Elias. "Bro, the entire restaurant is talking about you. You're a legend." Then from Layla, "Jeff, I'm crying. You made all of us proud." Then from Chef Moreau, "Dinner for you and Lucas anytime. On me. You deserve it." But the most important message arrived at 11:45 p.m. from a number he didn't recognize. "Dr. Bernard, this is Sheikh Omar Al-Mansour. Please call my assistant in the morning." We have matters to discuss. And once again, thank you for reminding me why I love business. Not for the money, but for finding people like you. 12:15 a.m. Jeffrey unlocked the door of the small Astoria apartment. Mrs. Hanan was sitting on the old sofa, knitting a sweater. "My dear," she stood up, looking at his face. "What happened?" Jeffrey closed the door, leaned back against it, and suddenly, everything he had held inside all night poured out. Not tears, just trembling. Mrs. Hanan wrapped her arms around him, small but strong. "Tell me." And he did. Everything. The insults, the champagne bottle, the decision to speak, the poem, Sheikh Omar, the business card. When he finished, Mrs. Hanan held his face between her hands. "My son, I have always known who you are. Now, the world knows too." "I'm scared," Jeffrey admitted. "I'm scared everything will change." "Everything has changed," she said, "but not because they finally saw you. Because you finally allowed them to." Jeffrey walked into Lucas's room. The boy was fast asleep, his Spider-Man backpack hanging on the chair, math homework on the desk. Jeffrey sat beside the bed and brushed the hair from his son's forehead. "Lucas," he whispered, "there's something I want to tell you, even if you're sleeping. I used to think I had failed you because I couldn't give you a bigger home, or vacations like other families, or the toys your friends have. I was afraid it meant I wasn't a good father." Lucas shifted slightly, eyes still closed. "But tonight, I understood something. Worth doesn't come from what you have. It comes from who you become when things are hard, who you are when no one sees you, who you are when giving up would be the easiest thing." His voice faltered. "And I hope that when you grow up, you won't remember the things I couldn't give you, but the things I tried to give you, that I fought for you, every single day." "Dad," Lucas murmured, eyes still shut. "I know. I always know." Jeffrey kissed his son's forehead. "Sleep, buddy. I love you." "I love you too," Lucas mumbled, rolling to one side. Back in the living room, Jeffrey sat at the small desk, the place where he wrote his dissertation, read Arabic poetry, and prepared for the next day. He opened his laptop, created a new email, and began typing. To Professor Margaret Hassan, Georgetown University. Subject, progress update, and a story. "Dear Professor Hassan, I know I owe you an update on Chapter 7. I'm sorry for the delay, but tonight something happened that changed both my research and my life. I have a story to tell you. And I think it may become a case study for the dissertation." He wrote until 2 a.m., recording everything. Not out of revenge, not to expose anyone, but because it was pure research about language, power, and what happens when the invisible begin to speak. Before going to bed, he looked at Laura's photo on the nightstand. "You'd be proud of me, sweetheart," he whispered. "I don't know what tomorrow will look like. But tonight, I did it." And for the first time in 3 years, he fell asleep without dreaming of hospitals, only of doors opening. 6 months later, Jeffrey Bernard walked into the Astor Court, not in the black uniform anymore, but in a charcoal Tom Ford suit. A leather briefcase hung at his side, carrying his laptop, contract documents, and the printed copy of his dissertation. Finally finished, finally approved, finally published. "Dr. Bernard," Mr. Haddad greeted him warmly, shaking his hand firmly. "Your usual table is ready." "Thank you, Nabel," Jeffrey said. They were on a first-name basis now. 6 months had changed everything. Jeffrey was now the Chief Cultural Communications Consultant for Al Mansour International Holdings, with a starting salary of $180,000, the exact amount of medical debt he had carried for 3 years. Sheikh Omar had negotiated to have that debt paid as part of Jeffrey's hiring package. The Al Mansour Education Fund had covered the remainder of his Georgetown tuition. His dissertation, featuring an anonymized case study of that night at the Astor Court, had been published to critical praise. 3 universities had offered him professorship positions, but more importantly, Lucas now had time with his father. Mornings were no longer rushed. Evenings were no longer empty. Weekends meant Central Park, museums, the zoo. "Do you remember when Dad worked every night?" Lucas asked him last week. "Why do you ask, buddy?" "I remember it, but I like this version better." "So do I, son. So do I." At the VIP table at 7 p.m., Sheikh Omar Al-Mansour was already seated, reading the Financial Times. The Nasser brothers were on their way. They were regular clients now, all using Jeffrey's consulting services. "Ah, Jeffrey!" Sheikh Omar stood and embraced him the Arab way, shoulders touching 3 times. "Sit. I have news." "Good news, I hope." "Always good," the Sheikh smiled. "The Boston deal is signed. Thanks to your cultural analysis, we saved 6 months of negotiations." They spoke about work, life, family. Sheikh asked about Lucas. He'd met the boy twice, each time bringing gifts like a gentle grandfather. Jeffrey hesitated, then asked, "And Prince Rami?" Sheikh exhaled. "Rami is complicated. He isn't a bad man, only someone blinded by privilege. But—" a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "He asked about you last week." "About me?" "He wanted to know if you would consult for his charity foundation. I told him to ask you himself." Jeffrey considered it. "If he asks respectfully, I'll consider it." "That is the answer of a good man," Sheikh said softly. After dinner, Jeffrey stepped into the kitchen. Chef Moreau, now a close friend, was directing his team. "Jeffrey, I didn't think you'd stop by tonight." "I wanted to thank you, Chef, for everything." Chef waved a hand dismissively. "There is nothing to thank me for. You earned all of this." "No," Jeffrey said. "You saw me when I was invisible. The chocolate you placed on my tray that night, remember? You said it was a reminder that someone saw my worth." "I remember. It kept me going, Chef. When I wanted to give up, I remembered that." The 2 men embraced, a French chef and an American scholar, bound by one night that changed everything. Jeffrey stood on Fifth Avenue, the same place he had stood 6 months earlier. But now he wasn't trembling. He wasn't exhausted. He wasn't afraid. His phone rang. Video call. Lucas. "Dad, Grandma Hanan is making mansaf. Are you coming home for dinner?" "Of course, buddy. I'll be there in 30 minutes. "Yay! And Dad, guess what? I got an A on my math test." "That's amazing, kiddo. I'm proud of you." Lucas frowned playfully. "But you're the amazing one. You do everything." Jeffrey laughed. "Son, I just do my part. But you work hard at school, you're kind to your friends, you remember your mom and still smile. You're the truly amazing one." "Dad, you're amazing too," Lucas said seriously. "And you know what? I want to learn Arabic like you, so I can understand the poems you read." Jeffrey's heart nearly burst. "We'll learn together, I promise." Jeffrey's story, carefully retold in his dissertation and later on Harvard Business Review, spread like ripples across water. The St. Regis launched the Hidden Talent Initiative, evaluating staff skills and discovering a laundry worker with an engineering degree, a front desk agent with financial expertise, a housekeeper with a nursing diploma. Al-Mansour Holdings founded the Invisible Talent Recognition Program. Other companies followed. Jeffrey spoke at TED, TEDx, business schools, global conferences. Each time, he brought Lucas, so the boy could see that purpose can bloom from pain. But the most important moment didn't happen on a stage. It happened one evening when Lucas, now 9, was doing homework beside him. "Dad," Lucas asked quietly, "how come you didn't tell that prince from the beginning that you knew Arabic?" Jeffrey thought for a moment. "Because sometimes You have to let people reveal who they really are. And sometimes, you wait for the right moment to reveal who you are. When is the right moment? When staying silent hurts you more than speaking, Jeffrey answered. When your dignity is at stake. When your story might help someone else find their voice. Lucas nodded, then wrapped his arms around his dad. Dad, you're my hero. Jeffrey held him close. And you're mine. This story isn't about a man who knows Arabic. It's about seeing the people the world considers invisible. Because behind every uniform, every tired smile, every quiet endurance, there is talent, a story, a worth waiting to be recognized. Because titles do not define dignity. And jobs do not define intelligence. Today, who in your life is being overlooked? And if you truly looked at them, what would you discover? If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel. Every week, we share small but powerful journeys, moments when invisible people rise and change their world. And who knows, maybe someday your story will be told here.